Right, good afternoon. Is the information recording? Okay, right, apologies. The Chief Executive and I have just come out of a meeting which unfortunately we couldn't leave until dead on 12 o'clock. I apologise. Right, so item 1 on the agenda, which is the apologies for absence. We have an apology from Councillor Robert New and Councillor Hannah Hockaday, and Councillor Ryan Brent is finishing work in now and is travelling here because of course we had to reschedule this meeting from the previous planned meeting date, so he will be here at some point. In terms of public deputations, we've got
Councillor Jenny Brent's also hoping to join us as well. So she's on her way for another event.
Right, okay, thank you very much. In terms of public deputations, we've got no public deputations today for the Cabinet meeting. So, colleagues, declarations of interest? No? Okay, none to recall, thank you very much. And then item 3 on the agenda, which is the record of the previous decision meeting held on the 12th of February here at the Portsmouth Guildhall. I trust colleagues have had the opportunity to have a look through. Any questions, comments or matters arising? No? Okay, thank you very much. Right, so then we move on to item 4, which is the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children's Board annual report. And we've got Louise Boyle here to introduce it. Over to you.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name, as Leader has introduced me, is Louise Boyle. My day job is that I work for Home Start, which is a local family charity, but I also vice chair on the Safeguarding Board as a representative of the voluntary sector. So apologies that Rich Johns, the chair, couldn't be with us today. You've got me instead. And I've got Lucy Rylett with me, who's the business manager of the board, and this is her full-time job, so she's the absolute expert on all things, and she led on this report, which I'm very proud to present today. I think it's an excellent report of the work that happened in 16-17. Obviously we're now nearly through 17-18, but that's the period of time that this refers to. You'll have had the report in advance, you've been able to see it, and the report introducing the report, so I won't go through in much detail, but just wanted to highlight to you the work that we did around as a board around the 4 priorities within the year, and just talk you through each of those really. So our first priority as a board was working with children that are suffering from neglect. The work that was done around that was mostly around a review and an audit of what had happened previously, because this was an ongoing concern. It's something that's remained as a priority for the board. The review really showed that in terms of the neglect that is prevalent in children in Portsmouth, the impact hadn't been great, but the impact on the way people were starting to tackle things had started to change. And we looked closely at what had happened when things had gone well, and it was very much to do with working practice and the strategic way in which practitioners were dealing with the neglect issues. So we looked at embedding that into the tools and into the training so that people were learning from the best practice, and that was the focus really around there. Neglect has remained as a priority because it is something that remains it remains a priority, so it's remained a priority. It's still very much at the forefront of the work we do in the board. The second priority that we worked on was the communication and participation, so trying to get ourselves more well known within the public in Portsmouth, so for parents and children, and also with practitioners, because it's a valuable resource that they're aware of the work that the Safeguarding Board does and of the resources that they put out there for them to use in terms of tools and policies and so forth. So the focus for that work was very much around the website. The website was made much more prevalent, and the increase hits, it pretty much doubled during that year, from 736 in the previous year to 1,556. So we would take from that practitioners are accessing useful resources a lot more. we used the opportunity to refresh the procedures that are for the 4 LSCBs. So that's why we work in partnership with Hampshire, the Isle of Wight and Southampton on policies and procedures that work well across those 4 areas. So we do all of that in partnership. And we also use that as an opportunity to make sure the thresholds document was up to date. So that's making sure that practitioners are clear on what sort of support children and young people might need, where they fit into different tiers of needs. We also introduced a termly newsletter in that period, which has helped us to make sure that all agencies in the city are clear, or agencies that are working with children and families are clear on what the priorities are and what sort of work is expected of them. The third priority we were looking at was the MET, so that's missing, exploited and trafficked children. Area of concern, obviously, up and down the country. We managed to implement a strategy during that year, and Operation Make Safe was implemented during that year as well. So that was about some on-the-ground work, going out and talking to what we would call the nighttime economies, so the bars, restaurants, hotels and taxi drivers, making sure they're aware of the sorts of things that they might be concerned by if they witness them in terms of young people being exploited and trafficked in our city. So that was, very close links there with the communication priority, because it's about making people aware of how they can support young people. The fourth priority was around bullying, and especially in schools, and that priority was picked up directly from the voice of the young people in our city, who told us that was something that they were very concerned about when we engaged with them during our development day. We have mostly tackled that through the introduction of the restorative approach. That's been very helpful for schools. The uptake on training on that has been excellent, and it's about people working in schools with children and young people, helping them to focus on what harm has happened, who's created the harm, and bringing those two people together to try and restore the relationship and move forward. So that's it's an approach that's being threaded through lots of different areas of work with children and young people, but it's especially helpful for tackling bullying. So that's been the way that we've supported schools to look at bullying. Was also throughout that year a quarterly programme of audits, so we're able to look carefully at what work's being done to safeguard children in the range of agencies in the city. We looked at domestic abuse, we looked at neglect, we looked at the quality of report to child protection conferences, and were able to implement some changes through all of those things and make sure that all the learning we do through all of these different arenas is threaded through into the training for all the different agencies that's accessed via the Safeguarding Board. So yes, that was the main points that I wanted to raise today. Can obviously take any questions that you might have had as you went through the reports ahead of the meeting.
Thank you very much. There's a huge amount of information in this report, and I suppose, had the advantage of having spoken to Lucy a few times about some of these things, including the anti-bullying stuff, and just getting briefings from, obviously, Alison and the Children's Social Care team, as well as things have been progressing. Yeah. I think it's great about the new website. Well done. It's exactly the kind of tool, I guess, it's proving that it's successful with all the different agencies being able to link in and use it, which is obviously really, really important. And 100% increase in usage either means that, well, as we know, it really wasn't really used at all before, but actually, if you have got good take-up now, as long as it's monitored and we know that it is an effective tool going forward, that's great. Obviously, the topic for me of neglect is obviously a very sad one. And we want to try and reduce it and prevent it from happening, but it is important, obviously, that where it is happening, we are on top of it. And the work that you've done and the detection of how much better professional agencies are of spotting the signs now, the knock-on effect of that is that our looked after children numbers obviously have gone up. But if that's because children need to be in our care, then that's what we're here for. It's a core function, obviously, of a council. Now we're working on the prevention, because prevention is better than cure, obviously. But at the moment, we're still in cure phase with children that are there and families are already in crisis. The Termly newsletter, I think, is a really good idea. And I did get one last week electronically, which I think that's a monthly one, item 9. I'm not sure if that was anything that you guys have been involved in. It might have just come from the children's care team then, but it gives us sort of a monthly update of how many children are in care and sort of what the breakdown is and ages and those sorts of things. The fact that you sort of are working with the community as well, such as taxi drivers and people like that, to really spot, particularly around the CSE subject, I think is absolutely key. And we obviously had a success at the early part of last year, and I can say this, obviously it was reported in the press, so it's not me showing anything I shouldn't be, around a hotel that actually picked up something and reported that back, and a conviction was subsequently made. So, you know, it's really important actually that there are lots of eyes and ears in the community that have their part to play in looking out for children, which I think is absolutely right. The anti-bullying bit, obviously, quite important as well. And we had an anti-bullying conference run in the Guildhall by one of our groups of young people in the city that set up a community interest company, which is great that they did that last month, which I did attend. In the three, it's a question for you. In the three priority areas going forward, obviously neglect is still there. Completely understand why. The risk of children exploitation, which covers a whole lot of things. Again, understand why. And then children affected by domestic abuse. But then the bullying thing, is that something that you'll come back to in the future? Because that's not specifically on there now going forward.
No, it's not on there specifically. Obviously, it is something that we would always be concerned about, but I think we would wait now to see what the impact of all of the training that's been done around the restorative practice, and that has gone through into 17-18. I think actually the uptake in 17-18 has been even more impressive, and we would say that, you know, we're at a different phase now of the rollout of that approach for all practitioners. So it was time, we felt, to have a different priority, and like you say, we could return to it in the future. It doesn't mean it's not something that we think is important still.
And we have supported the local authority education department in the bullying practice guidance that goes out to schools. So we took the work that we'd done over that year, handed that back to the education department, so they used that in a thorough review and rewrite of the bullying practice guidance that goes into schools. And we've been developing restorative schools, so the work that we did, although it's not a priority, it still is quite a focus area for the work that we've been doing as a business team rather than as a board, in terms of supporting partners in taking that work, sharing it, embedding it in. We will be reviewing that and how it is being implemented, like Louise said. So if we're not seeing progress being made, we can bring that back to the board and reconsider whether it needs to become a priority area again.
Okay, super, thank you. Right, colleagues, anybody got any questions or comments or anything they'd like to add about this report? No? And is this report going on to full council for noting? So or is it just for Cabinet to approve? Because on the recommendation it says it's coming here as the annual report to specifically David and myself to be satisfied that the safeguarding just here. Okay, thank you very much. Right, colleagues, thank you much for the work you've done and for coming along stage to present that. So colleagues, everyone happy to agree the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children Board annual report? Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Brent, thank you for joining us. Colleagues did say that you were en route, so any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so moving on to the next item, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities SEND Implementation Grant allocation, and we've got Julia Catherine here to present it.
Hello, yes, Julia Catherine, thank you. This will be the 5th year of the SEND reform grant, so I'm kind of back with the same request, really. So it's the 5th year of the grant. The purpose of the grant is to enable us to implement the SEND reforms. The amount of the grant has decreased gradually each year in recognition of the fact that the practices are becoming embedded as business as usual. The focus really has been on, we've employed additional staff in the SEND team to focus on transferring statements to education, health and care plans, and we're nearly at the end of that process. So I would like to say that the SEND team have been working incredibly hard to make sure that we're on track with those transfers, on top of maintaining new plans and making sure that families have the same positive experience, whether they're on a transfer route or a new plan. So we're nearly at the end of that process now, but some further work to go. It's described as a kind of a 10-year transformation programme in terms of the work of SEND, and part of that is extending the statutory protections down to 0 and up to the age of 25 for some young people that need it. So it's quite a big set of changes that have been brought in. But because the grant comes in unring-fenced, obviously we are seeking approval to use it for that purpose. In addition, next year we've got a small amount of additional money to set up a supported internship forum. So that's really about working with young people to get them prepared for employment when they leave education. So the grant is just over 118,000 for next year for the SEND reforms, and then nearly 47,000 for the Preparation for Employment grant.
Thank you very much, Julia. Anyone got any questions on this? No? So there's two recommendations: that the SEND reform grant, £118,648, is allocated to the education portfolio, and that the Preparation for Employment grant, we've just heard £40,000, 2018-19, also be allocated to the education portfolio. Colleagues minded to support that? Okay, thank you very much. That's gone through unanimously. Thank you much, Julia. Right, so on to item 6, the annual health and wellbeing strategy. And we've got Jason, our Director of Public Health, here to introduce it.
Thanks. So the health and wellbeing strategy is the strategy for the Health and Wellbeing Board that we refresh every 3 years at the moment. And it's effectively, I guess, as with all of these strategies, it's a consensus statement, because it has to bring together a decent summary of all the city's health problems, while still the challenge is trying to maintain a focus on what we can deliver on and what we can actually prioritise. The Health and Wellbeing Board, as you know, is a statutory board, so it's got a duty to cover the outlined priorities for the healthcare services within the city, but obviously a lot of the benefits to population health come from our actions on the wider determinants of health and the things that keep people healthy. And in those, chief amongst those are our employment, our economic growth, housing, food, environment, transport, etc. So they're partly reflected in the strategy, but for some of those, obviously the body of the work will be done elsewhere and not under the auspices of the Health and Wellbeing Board. I think also hopefully reflected in the strategy, many of the city's health problems relate to non-communicable diseases, things where they're mostly influenced by lifestyle risk factors, smoking, drinking too much, unhealthy diet, lack of exercise, etc. And so for those, the strategy hopefully reflects the fact that to deliver in a number of those areas, we need to empower people to address those themselves, and that the services that we provide are never going to be able to reach absolutely everybody at the scale with which those problems exist in our population. For the sort of main bulk of it, I guess, I think page 67 is probably the best one to look at. There's a nice, hopefully, summary table there that we've tried to break it down as succinctly as possible to a number of themes that we're going to make our priorities. This strategy has been through a number of partners and an extensive consultation exercise. It's been approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board, and now we're bringing it before Cabinet for approval.
Thank you very much, Jason. I mean, some of us have been through this, obviously, at the Health and Wellbeing Board a couple of weeks ago. And actually, I did have a meeting with a nurse from QA Hospital who came in this morning, because she was coming to meet with Claire in your team about how to implement some of the stuff that needs to happen here within operations, planned operations within QA Hospital. So she just happens to be someone that I know, so she was coming to talk to me, and then I said, oh, yeah. And I gave her a copy, because she hadn't actually seen this at that point, so I gave her a copy of the proposed health and wellbeing strategy that was obviously coming here today as well.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think working with QA Hospital closer is a really good idea. I mean, I don't know, Luke, if you've got anything to add, but from my perspective, when you look at the core themes, and I know we spoke about this at Health and Wellbeing as well, but we are, you know, it really is now overlapping into so many different things we're doing, from planning to how we're thinking about how, you know, we're going to move around the city, about cycling, and the great news we've got about our community bike scheme through Councillor Bosch's portfolio, confirmed 2 days ago. I think for 8p a day, there's going to be so many more people travelling around this relatively flat city by bike, which is going to increase, obviously, health, we're hoping. I think the focus the government is doing centrally at the moment around mental health, and also that separate piece around isolation, is also quite important. And I think it's something that maybe, yeah, I'm interested to maybe talk to you about with Councillor Stubbs as well, you know, about how we can take some of those things forward, and also make sure we're maximising on any grants available that are coming through from the government as well. It's a really good piece of work. As you say, it is just the refresh this year, but you know, the devil's always in the detail with this one, of seeing in 10 years' time whether or not this is working, or even 20 years' time in some cases. Right, colleagues, any additional comments or questions for Jason? No? Okay. Right, thank you very much for bringing the refresh here. This one does go on to full council. It does. Okay, right. So this one is us noting it, going on to full council for their information as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so on to item 7, Treasury Management Policy. And Chris to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. Before you is the proposed Treasury Management Policy for 2018-19, and this one goes on to Council for approval, so it's before you today for your endorsement. You will know that Treasury Management covers 3 broad things. It's really about how the Council manages its short-term cash flows. So if it has short-term surpluses or short-term deficits, how it manages those, mainly through the money markets. It's also about the Council's long-term borrowing and its strategy for long-term borrowing, as well as its overall strategy for the repayment of debt. So it covers those 3 core things. The strategy itself is similar to that for previous years. I'll just take you through the key changes. So the key changes from previous years are, firstly, that in relation to, you'll probably recall, in relation to the Housing Revenue Account, a few years back the Council bought itself out of the Housing Revenue Account subsidy system so that it no longer had to pass over circa £4 million a year to the government, had to buy itself out of that for a price of 87 million. The Council borrowed for that. There is actually no requirement, oddly enough, to set aside any money for its repayment, but the Council has taken a prudent approach to that in any event and has been setting aside money for its repayment. But in this period where the Housing Revenue Account itself is in a difficult period with rent reduction, 1% rent reductions over the next 3 years, the proposal here is to effectively allow the Housing Revenue Account a debt repayment holiday for that period, in order that we can continue to provide the same level of, if you like, repairs and services for housing tenants that we would otherwise have with a stronger income stream from rents. The second and probably the final key change is the duration with which, or the proposal is to extend the duration within which the Council will provide a bond to, or bonds to, Hampshire Community Bank. Any bonds that the Council does provide will be secured on the Community Bank's underlying loan book, so it will be as secure as any other of the investments that the Council would usually undertake. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have seen a typographical error on page 110, paragraph 3.2, where the dates aren't quite right. So where it suggests in the first paragraph that the report considered by the Cabinet on the 12th of March and the Council on the 13th of March, obviously those dates have passed, and it should say the 16th of March and the 20th of March. Happy to answer any questions whatsoever.
Thank you very much. Just a question. How much were we setting aside for the debt repayment How much were we setting aside per year?
We were setting aside around about 3 million a year because the assumption was that we would repay that 87 million over a period of around about 30 years.
Right, okay. Because as soon as you said that, we both, when it wasn't mandatory to put some money aside, I looked at Luke and said, there's one for the future, but you're already doing the MRP on that one, so thanks very much for that. I mean, obviously this is a really important piece of work for us, particularly as we are hopefully now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and with the safe and steady Chancellor with his hand on the tiller talking about potential, maybe, increase in public spending from 2019 onwards. Dare I say we may be on our way out of the woods? Who knows? But I certainly think in local government, regardless, we have taken more than our fair share, and I would hope to think that at the end of the 4-year settlement programme, which takes us up to 2019, start of the 2019 financial year, the government, if there is anything further required, will be looking towards other parts of the public sector and potentially allowing councils a bit of breathing space, particularly around the pressure we have on social care still, and a growing and rising pressure because we have an elderly and growing population, which is where so much of our costs go, obviously. From my perspective, having worked quite closely with Chris on this, obviously through the budget process, and looking at our medium-term forecast, long-term forecast, the Treasury management we then have underpinning how we are bringing in income, how we're managing our debt, the debt repayments we've had, the indications we've had from government around how to account for the MRP, the debt repayment holiday, and also for the way that we account for our property investment stuff. I think this is a really good document, and I'm happy to wholeheartedly support it. Colleagues, does anyone else have any comments or questions? Councillor Stubbs? No? Okay. Right. So in terms of the Governance Audit and Standards Committee recommendation, their report on the Treasury Management Policy 2018-19, this one I know does go on to full council. So we are being asked today to support the report before it makes its way next Tuesday. So colleagues, everyone in support? Thank you very much. Okay, that's agreed. So moving on to item 8, the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for Q3 of 2017-18. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Leader. As you've said, this is the financial position for the Council for the current year's budget for Q3. So that takes us up to the end of December. And as you would expect, we've obviously just revised the budget. That was done in the February meeting, the February Council meeting, and therefore you'd expect us to have a relatively small variance against the budget at this stage. The forecast is for an underspend overall of 133,000, which is obviously a very, very small percentage of the overall Council's budget. You will also know that throughout the year we've been consistently reporting that there are financial pressures both across adults and children's social care. They're set out in the report and they amount to £1.7 million and £3 million respectively. Obviously, we went through the revised budget exercise, and as part of that, the Council provided for a sum of around about £3.3 million in contingency in order to cater and guard against the likely financial pressures in those services. So that has largely been mitigated within the overall budget itself. Elsewhere within the budget, there are a couple of notable forecast underspends that are helping to bring the overall position into balance. One of those is in resources of £0.4 million, largely relating to the Council's performance on recovery of housing benefit overpayments. And secondly, another £0.4 million, which is additional income from the Council's Commercial Property Acquisition Fund in the Leaders portfolio, or the Leaders Pred portfolio. So if you take all of those together, it brings the Council to a forecast position for the end of the year of £133,000 underspent. There are, of course, ongoing issues in order to address adults and children's social care, but there are plans in place in both of those service areas to meet those over the short to medium term. Thank you.
Well, I mean, 108, what did you say, how much was the figure against? 113,000, sorry, I want to say 118 then. Yes, we're very close to the mark, but the fact is we did have an underspend overall corporately, which I think, you know, at the end of 7 years of the austerity programme, coming to our 8th year, I think is pretty remarkable overall. And as you've quite rightly said, that's thanks to two particular cabinet members who obviously did very well in their portfolios, which is myself and Councillor Jonas. So we give ourselves a metaphorical pat on the back. No, it's a collective effort, obviously, and the staff have done amazingly well. And I have to say, departments in the council that we genuinely did not think could go out and generate income. And a classic example, Councillor Symes's portfolio, where it's not about, you know, cutting services, it's about doing more for less. And the Mountbatten Centre, and the ending of a contract, we were paying, you know, almost £300,000 a year to a contractor to run it, and now the new contractor, we're not paying them a penny. In fact, they're paying us. So collectively, you know, a saving. They're playing great. But a saving amount, meaning this council was able to save over £500,000 by just bringing in a new, fresh, better contractor to be able to run a site for us. So, you know what, in those circumstances, I think well done to the staff who've worked incredibly hard under the, you know, behind the scenes often to achieve some very good things for the people that we represent. Right, colleagues, anyone else got something? Yeah, Councillor Stubbs.
Well, nothing much, but just since you're talking about the underspend, I think it is worth, when we're talking about, also just worth remembering that there was a very sizable revenue transfer to capital. So, in actual fact, in terms of the resources we had available, there was a lot that, you know, we were a long way under that because there was a lot of money we put into capital and into some reserves as well.
Can you just remind us how much that was roughly, the capital transfer, the revenue transfer to capital?
Yeah, well, Councillor Stubbs is absolutely right, and I think it was around the £5 to £6 million mark, and that is supporting your current years or your currently approved capital programme. So the capital programme that you have and approved back in February wouldn't have been anything like the size that it was, and therefore it would have constrained your ability, particularly around being able to support new school places, etc., which was obviously a large feature in the capital programme approved by Council in February.
Yeah, and I think it is really important because those schemes are doing things like paying for the water butts on the seafront. We're putting in new public toilets across the city, and let's not forget the last time that a previous administration were in the position that we're in now, they were actually proposing to cut, and they did close 16 public toilets across the city, and we reopened 12 of them. We couldn't open the remainder 4 because they'd either been knocked down, sold off, or long leases sold. You know, so we're able to opening Southsea Library opens on a Sunday for the first time, beginning first Sunday in April. That will then go on forever in perpetuity. Again, through income generated by Councillor Symes's waterfront gifts. We're able to invest in disabled beach buggies and a mat that's going on the beach to get disabled people into the water to improve their health and well-being, as we've heard in the previous report. So there's so much we're doing to invest by the fact we're able to do that revenue to capital transfer. So yeah, thank you for making the point. It's a good one, and it genuinely does mean that we can do some of the frills that maybe we otherwise wouldn't be able to. So, colleagues, anyone else got anything else they'd like to add? No? Okay. So in terms of item 8 then, the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, Q3, colleagues all happy to support? Thank you very much. Okay. And that one also goes on to full council. No. Oh, okay. I'm delighted it stays here. Thank you very much. I should know that by now, shouldn't I? And then the final report we have today is the Unaccompanied Asylum Children and the Capacity Building Grant. David.
Thank you. Yes, the reason this is before you is that this relatively modest sum compared to the costs that are incurred in this area isn't ring-fenced, so it's for the Cabinet to agree that this gets allocated to the children's budget for them to spend. Just by way of background, we are seeing increasing numbers of unaccompanied children coming into the city. This is particularly since the changes to the issues in Calais, and we're seeing more children coming in through our port, up to in the region of 70. So whilst it's lovely to see 188,000 come into the coffers, that's nothing compared to the sorts of costs that the City Council is incurring as a consequence of this. Paragraph 1.3 sets out the purposes to which we would be putting the funding, but really the decision before you today is to decide to allocate that money for children's services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just for colleagues, before we make the decision whether or not to allocate this unring-fenced money into the unaccompanied asylum children, well, to children's services effectively, it is a huge issue for us now. And actually, with the camp in Calais being disbanded, and actually most of them having now been disbanded, there is a concern and a worry that the camps will transfer, therefore, to Con or to that sort of region, and therefore making us particularly susceptible. And actually we have had over 5 or 6 unaccompanied asylum children enter the city since Christmas that have come in through the port on those routes from either Spain or through France. And I think the most recent 5 have come in through France, actually, as it happens, although previously the vast majority of the 70, as David mentioned, actually have come in through Spain. It is something that we've raised with the government. It is something we're in constant communication with them about. The money that we receive from the government doesn't, as David's quite rightly said, cover the cost of looking after these children. It is putting additional strain on the children's services, children's social care budget of we think around £1 million a year when you factor everything in, including additional educational support through teaching assistants, language translators, etc. And you know, as a port city, we are particularly susceptible. And as I'm on the national executive of the Local Government Association, in fact, I didn't raise it at the meeting last week, but normally every single meeting of the national executive, I make this point. Myself and Paul Carter, the leader of Kent, you know, we've had multiple conversations, and it is a concern. It is something we need to be reminding the government that this city here, relatively small city in the UK, are playing our part in this, and we're very happy to help, obviously, children that find themselves in this dire situation. However, the government has got a scheme where they say that local authorities should be looking up to children, in unaccompanied asylum children, up to 0.7% of their indigenous child population. Ours is well over that. And therefore, it's a voluntary code for other upper tier councils that have a children's social care department to offer to take children. And actually, there are multiple upper tier councils in the South East around us right now who are looking after none and are not being pressurised by the government to do that. And I think that is wrong and unfair. It's not actually just, it's not, you know, I don't want this to seem as if it's about money. It's actually about giving a really good care service to those children as well. When you're spread so thinly, it's more difficult often to do that. And there are, you know, some of the county councils, for example, who have both urban and semi-rural areas, could be catering for some of these children who are coming from, as I say, very, very sad and dire situations, you know, in a caring way, and I wish they were play their part slightly more. So I think the government may need to review this rather than it being a voluntary code to becoming a mandatory code, and then having to look after the allocation of where unaccompanied asylum children go when they enter the UK, much as they do with adults. Right, colleagues, anyone got anything else they'd like to add about the... Yes, Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, firstly, just for the benefit of our reporter friend, I mean, the percentage is 0.07, just for accuracy on that. I mean, it is, yeah, I mean, when you look at the numbers around the country on this, I mean, it's Kent with Dover, it's Hillingdon with Heathrow Airport, and it's Croydon with the Passport Office, which have got very large numbers. And this really is a national problem. It should be a national solution. The government should be meeting these costs in full.
Colleagues, anyone else? No? Okay. So if everyone's minded to ring fence then that money into the children's social care budget for the unaccompanied asylum children, everyone agreed? Okay, that's approved. Thank you very much. Right, and the final item on the agenda is the Portsmouth Harbour One Public Estate. Do you want to just say a few words about the Gosport link-up and what we're doing?
Yes, certainly. I'm sorry you haven't got a report today. The One Public Estate is an attempt by the Cabinet Office to get better performance, particularly across government departments, in terms of the disposal of surplus government land, with a priority towards delivery of housing. We are trying to get as much movement on this as possible because both within this city and across the water in Gosport we have a lot of government land, particularly MOD land, but also Ministry of Justice and Department for Health. We are trying to get as much leverage both in terms of securing funding that we can use both in Portsmouth and in Gosport, to try to get those sites into beneficial future use. But I think probably given the scale of the issues, more importantly for us, it's about trying to get leverage within the Cabinet Office and influence within the Cabinet Office to get some movement in the behaviours of some of those other government departments. So we have a cunning plan. We will brief you further on this in the future. We do believe we'll be able to secure some money, but I think more importantly, it's securing changes of behaviour and attitude in terms of the disposal of sites.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stubbs?
Yeah, just by one other question. So the NHS Property Services, I mean, you know, they've got a number of assets through the city. I'm not thinking here about the big ones. I'm thinking about the little ones and little contracts that they've got. I note in Plymouth, the City Council managed to secure control over those buildings because it's not a well-managed estate of buildings. And there's, you know, you hear, I mean, I know it's a CCG would agree that it could be delivered more effectively than it is. Is that something you are hoping to pursue?
Yeah, I think that's right, Luke, and that's a good application. I think generally from the Cabinet Office point of view and the Department of Health point of view, they're more interested in the bigger lumps of land. But I think you're right in terms of the smaller stuff as well, and more efficient and effective use, and more deliberative and consultative approaches to disposal.
Frank?
Yes, David, when you said you're consulting with the Cabinet Office, are you involving our two local MPs in any of this?
Our two MPs are aware of the issues, and we have had conversations with them, and we are engaging with the Cabinet Office primarily through the MP for Gosport, because she also has a very big influence and impact on this. So yes, we are using the MPs to try to get the influence that we possibly can. It's a major issue.
And I think this is a great example of another piece of work, joined up work between Portsmouth and Gosport. Obviously, we do share so many similarities, and that harbour is certainly one of them. And so, you know, one of the things that will be happening is that David is going to be coming to brief us on some of the background around this, a bit more about the detail of the policy, and then a task group will be set up, which will include people from both strategic stakeholders from both sides of the water, including the Ministry of Defence. So for us, you know, this is potentially an opportunity to get some money from the government, from the Cabinet Office, as David said, to unlock strategic sites. But more information will come to all of us, and then we'll bring another decision forward for public noting, or maybe for a formal decision to acknowledge and give some political support to the One Public Estate programme in Portsmouth, which is, I think, something government may be looking for actually as well. Okay, colleagues, any other questions? No. All right, thank you very much. The meeting is ended. Thank you all for coming.